What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up meta predictions for the new format that we will see once Celestial Guardians comes out. And the first deck we're going to look at is the Blastoise deck that we just recently saw in the last Ursi Day tournament that was played, and it got 5th place. But now that we have Rare Candy, I do believe this deck will definitely get better and automatically become a top 5 meta deck going forward, and it's due to the fact that we can combine Rare Candy and Misty in the same turn, which could potentially be a very broken combo. So of course the deck still looks very similar. I did add the Articuno like the old deck currently has, but I'm not so sure if we're gonna want that Articuno in the deck going forward. However, it is still a very good card to have in the deck. For one, you can also ramp onto it with Manaphy and allow yourself to lose a single price card before your opponent starts to try and attack into an EX, allowing you to get into that Blastoise, or giving you more time to get into that Blastoise and not giving up any EX Pokemon in the meantime. The changes of the deck, of course, is we removed one Wartortle. We're still going to keep one in just in case of inconsistency issues. You're still going to want the ability to evolve into the Wartortle if you don't have that Rare Candy and that Blastoise in hand. And then we also, instead of playing 2 Aritas, we played 2 Misties, because the original deck, or the current deck that we see, usually plays 2 Irida and 1 Misty. I am actually changing it to 2 Misty, 1 Irida, because of that broken combo with Rare Candy in the same turn. Being able to get into your Blastoise with Rare Candy and Misty all of its energy in the same turn is going to be absolutely incredible. Now, because we have to add 2 Rare Candy and only remove 1 Wartortle, we kind of lose 1 space in the deck. And so, as you can see, I have Lily and Communications on the screen, and it's only because I'm not sure if these cards are going to want to be in the deck or not. So for one, we probably still want to play Irida over Lily, because Lily does only work with Blastoise, even though it is more HP, but Irida actually works with Articuno and Manaphy, as well as Wartortle or Squirtle. So we still might want to play the Irida over the Lily. And then I put Iono in the deck over the Communications, because I do feel like you can only play one of them. And if you do want to play one of each, you're either going to have to, one, remove the Articuno or the Wartortle. And I'm not so sure you want to remove any of them. You could put Communication in over Iono if you please, because then you can also Misty and Communications in the same turn, as well as Rare Candy. However, because you are playing a lot more supporters than some other decks might be playing, your hand might be very large, so therefore the Iono might actually come in handy, being able to get a ton of more cards into your hand that aren't the ones that you put back into your deck. So Communications and Iono is one of those 2 of those cards where you would probably have to decide between the 2 of them. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into one of the decks that I think might be a meta deck, absolutely way better than its current form going forward in the future. So the next deck we're going to look at is Meowcarada and Butterfree, because we do get to play both a Caterpie and a Sprigatito, which means they both have the same effect of their attack, which searches your deck for a random grass Pokemon and puts it into your hand, which means both of these cards have the potential to search either your Meowcarada or your Butterfree. And if by turn 2 you haven't been Marsed and you have a Rare Candy in your hand, that means you can Rare Candy into either your Butterfree or your Meowcarada. So this will work very similar to both the Beedrill and the Wigglytuff builds of Meowcarada, being that you can Rare Candy into 2 different Pokemon, either your Beedrill or your Meowcarada, in this case Butterfree or your Meowcarada, but also heal your Meowcarada and yourself as well. In this case, instead of having the Wigglytuff, you have the Butterfree. This deck will also be playing 2 Capes, 1 Erica, and 1 Lily. Because we have all grass type Pokemon, obviously Erica is a benefit, but Lily does heal more damage to your stage 2, so both Butterfree and Meowcarada, but the Erica will probably still want to be played because if your Caterpie or your Sprigatito takes some damage and you can't evolve them, you might want to be able to heal them up so that on the following turn it still doesn't get knocked out. And we're playing 2 Caterpie instead of 1 Caterpie because Caterpie only has 50 HP, which means it could be one-shotted by Carnivine and Skarmory. So you're going to definitely want those capes or your second Caterpie to be able to rare candy the second Caterpie if the first one gets knocked out. I love this deck a lot because, again, it feels a lot like the Wigglytuff build, which did have some success in the meta currently that we're in, and it stays as a single prize deck, but allows us to be a lot more consistent by having both Caterpie and Sprigatito as cards that can search grass type cards in your deck. Now, the rest of the deck is pretty similar to the rest of the Wigglytuff build. 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, 1 Red, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Pokeball, and then, of course, the 2 Rare Candy that we're going to want to get into either Butterfree or Meowcarada or both. Now, again, obviously edits will have to be made to this because you're not playing any Florigata or Metapod. You might want to play a 1/1 of each of those, and in that case, you would have to remove some cards. But then there's also other cards you might want to play, things like Iono and Communication. However, if you're not playing any Stage 1 lines, I don't think it's necessary to play something like a Communications, but Iono could fit well too because, yes, you are playing, I think, 6, 7 different supporter cards in the deck, so you might want to play Iono, but you also might not need to because your Caterpie and your Sprigatito allow this deck to be pretty consistent with getting the Stage 2 that you want in your hand. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. The next deck that I think could potentially be the new meta version of Fighting Toolbox is the Rampardo and Aerodactyl build. So I believe that Aerodactyl absolutely should be played going forward in fighting type decks, simply due to the fact that there's probably going to be so many rare candy decks. So basically, you're going to want to stop your opponent from being able to evolve their active Pokemon into either their Stage 1 or their Stage 2 directly with rare candy. So having the Aerodactyl on the field can potentially allow you to do that. So this deck is already very good. Being able to play things like Hitmonlee, Marshadow, and Sudowoodo in any fighting deck is already very good, kind of creating that fighting toolbox deck. Now, by adding Aerodactyl as an additional tech card that can attack as well is a very good idea. And you're also automatically going to start with either Hitmonlee or Sudowoodo or Marshadow in your active spot, which means Hitmonlee can start attacking for 30 damage to the bench, or your Sudowoodo can start attacking in to those EX Pokemon for 50 damage. And then what you can do is you can also play a Communications down the line to get into that Rampardos in order to use Rare Candy to get into it. Now, in this version, I didn't put a Craniodose. You might want to, which is why it's on the screen. And you also might want to build a Lucario build, which means your Rampardos will be doing 150 and your Aerodactyl will be doing 100 damage with the Lucario. So in that case, you would have to obviously remove some cards, but I do think you definitely want to be playing 2 Aerodactyl and 2 Rampardos. Those lines are very important to the deck, and then you have the other additional cards in order to make the deck better, like Sudowoodo, Hitmonlee, Marshadow, and potentially Lucario. So I think in some way, shape, or form, fighting decks with Rampardos will want to include Aerodactyl in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a Lucario build or not. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. The next deck is the Glade deck with Aerodactyl as well, because again, I really do think there's going to be a lot of evolution Pokemon, a lot of evolution decks, Stage 2 decks because of Rare Candy, and I think Aerodactyl just has a ton of value in the meta going forward because of those reasons. So this deck would now have to put in a 2 Aerodactyl and 2 Old Amber, and in this case, this is what I think the deck would look like. I think you would be playing 1 Hitmonlee Hitmonlee instead of 2. You would still play the Marshadow. You would play 1 Kirlia instead of 2 because you are playing 1 rare candy. That's right, only 1 rare candy, not 2. The deck space in this one is a little bit limited, but you can choose to remove either an Iono and a Communication for those consistency cards to have the second rare candy. It's totally up to you, but you really only need 1 if you have a Kirlia in the deck, because that means 1 line of your Glade can either evolve from Kirlia or it can evolve from rare candy. And then the rest of the deck is pretty standard. You definitely want to be playing Cyrus. The original deck usually plays 2, but it's also because you're playing 2 Hitmonlee, which increases your chances of hitting the bench for damage, being able to Cyrus them out. Now, I'm not saying don't put 2 Cyrus. I think most decks always want 2 Gust cards in their deck going forward, so I do believe you should definitely find a way to try and fit Cyrus, but for now, I'm just putting 1 just to give the idea of what I think the meta versions of these decks will kind of look like. But I do think for Glade, Aerodactyl will want to be in here. First of all, it's a fighting type Pokemon, which means it works alongside Glade already because you're obviously going to be using the same energies, and Aerodactyl can stop your opponent's deck from evolving, but you can still evolve yourself. So I do think that Aerodactyl in both Rampardos and Glade will definitely want to be added in some way, shape, or form. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. So this is what I believe a Giratina Raichu deck would look like. It would still play the Darkrai, but I would only play 1 so that you can focus on your energy, your dark energy that is, putting it onto the Alolan Raichu. And then what you want to do is manually or automatically ramp with your Giratina onto itself the psychic energies. And then in the end game, what you want to do is, if you're missing a breakpoint, you put Darkrai down on the bench and you attach an energy to it in order to get that additional damage. So I don't think that you would have Darkrai as your main attacker. You would actually just have it in the deck so that you can get additional damage. So now your Raichu, who does 60 plus 30 for each energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon, most likely can knock out a lot of things, but if you're still missing it, you can actually attach an energy to Darkrai plus do red in the same turn to get additional damage, which also means your Giratina would still be able to do 170 damage. The deck would still look very similar to the Giratina Darkrai deck that we currently play, except we would remove, not remove because you would depend what you want to put in the deck, but we would still probably want to at least play 1 Leaf to get a Darkrai or a Giratina out of the active when we don't want it there. We would still want to play 2 Capes because Darkrai and Alolan Raichu still only have 140 HP. We would still want to play a Rocky Helmet to get that additional damage, that passive damage for those breakpoints, and we would also still probably want to play a Pokemon Center Lady and a potion at 1/1 in order to remove the damage that we might get from other Darkrai's on the other side of the board. Now, if it happens that Darkrai is not a huge meta threat and is not doing a ton of passive damage going forward in the meta, then you might want to put in those tech cards like Mars and Team Rocket Grunt in place of the potion and Pokemon Center Lady, because if we're not worried about all those 20 damage from Darkrai and stuff like that, then we don't need to put the heals in the deck. But I do think Darkrai and Giratina will probably still fit in the meta in some way, shape, or form. But if it doesn't, again, we just replace the heals with tech cards like Team Rocket Grunt and Mars. But I do like this version going forward better than straight up Darkrai Giratina, because first of all, your manual energy would want to go on something like an Alolan Raichu that can do a lot more damage, especially since it takes all colorless energy. And then you just put the 1 of Darkrai, like I said, in order to have those additional breakpoint possibilities by attaching energy to the Darkrai. Because again, your Alolan Raichu, unlike the Darkrai who needs the passive damage in order to knock something out eventually when it comes in for 80 damage, Alolan Raichu doesn't really need that. And so the Darkrai is just there in order to make sure that you could get those additional breakpoints later on in the game when you've already attached all your energy to Alolan Raichu. Anyways, with that being said, let's get into the last deck. The last deck I want to look at is the potential for Mewtwo EX, that is, to be a meta game player once again. We just saw in the previous meta, or the one we currently are in, being a Giratina Mewtwo 17 trainer. But now that we have Rare Candy, we might be able to put Gardevoir back into the deck to increase insane consistency in regards to getting a ton of energy on Mewtwo as quickly as possible, as it is a basic Pokemon that does 150 damage. So by playing both Giratina and Gardevoir in the deck alongside a 1 copy of Dawn, potentially 2, you might be able to ramp up onto Mewtwo as quickly as possible, because if we get a 2 energies on or just 1 energy on Mewtwo and ramp 1 onto Giratina, then the next turn what you can do is you can actually Dawn onto your Mewtwo, Manual onto Mewtwo, and then Gardevoir onto Mewtwo, which means on your second turn, you already have 4 energy on Mewtwo, doing 150 damage, which means now that you've discarded 2 energies in order to do that, on the following turn, you just do 1 Manual and 1 Gardevoir, and you're doing 150 damage every single turn. So this would be potentially pretty crazy. Now, of course, in a deck like this, with rare candies and stage 2s and stuff like that, it takes up a lot of deck space, but you might still want to find ways to fit in some of these cards, such as Mew EX, in order to be able to knock out certain things, or a mythical or 2 mythical slabs. Even Communications and Iono would of course fit very well in this deck, but I do think you're still always going to want to play at least 1 cape and possibly 1 Rocky Helmet and a red, just in order to make sure you can get those breakpoints for Pokemon that have like 170 to 180 damage. You're also going to want to play at least 1 Leaf, because all of your Pokemon require 2 energy retreat, such as Gardevoir, Giratina, and Mewtwo, and then 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus. The Cyrus might be able to be taken out because you're going to one-shot a lot of stuff, but again, if there's those points in the game where you're not one-shotting something, the Cyrus might be good to put into the deck. But I definitely think you're definitely going to want to play at least 1 Dawn, but Dawn and Cyrus, in my opinion, are potentially 2 of the cards you can take out to fit in some other cards, like Mew EX, like Mythical Slab, like Communication, or Iono. You also might want to fit in a 1 Kirlia in the deck, just in case you don't get that rare candy into Gardevoir. But this deck, being able to attack for 150 with your basic Mewtwo EX on your second turn of Manual Attach is pretty crazy, because again, turn 1, you attach 1, on your second turn, you rare candy into Gardevoir and move the energy from your Giratina with your Dawn, and then Manual again. That's 4 energy, 3 energy in 1 turn onto your Mewtwo EX, and you're just sweeping the game from that point. But anyways, that is it for the meta predictions. Let me know if you think these are any good, and if you think these will be meta decks, what you think the meta will look like. If I missed any decks, let me know what decks you think will be in the meta. You can also post them in my Discord, the decks that you think will be meta decks. But anyways, like, subscribe, and share, and as always, keep cooking.